If somebody is going to give you that kind of a commitment, they need the commitment from you first. The team has to be there. Team has to basically believe in it, and that's how it should be. And they should have jumped both feet in already. And whether the funding came or not, you have to believe in the mission and you be going after the mission. And then you can expect somebody to go and make a bet. So this whole situation about, oh, give me the money and then I'll get XYZ. And that person should have been there already. And it tells me a lot if they're not there. Like, are they risk averse? There's going to be so many ups and downs later on. This is just the beginning.
And welcome to another episode of the Venture to Victory podcast, where we look at the entrepreneurial journey from startup to exit. And I'm totally excited today because we've got a multiple-time startup founder who has raised tons of money. I mean, over 300 million between just a couple of his ventures. And he also had several exits and different types of exits. And he's our guest today, and he's going to talk about a bunch of stuff, including what he learned from raising that money and how we leverage that into more than one successful company and kind of what he's doing today. So Poojan, how are you doing?
Good. Thanks, Tim. Super excited to be here.
Well, thank you. Another beautiful California day. Poojan, I like to do an intro because in our circles, we're all well known, but a lot of people are unfamiliar sometimes with the company or the guest. So let's rock and roll. Poojan Kumar, you are the co-founder and CEO and president of Clumio, a data protection company founded in 2017 and now part of Commvault following its significant acquisition in 2024. Now, this is kind of staggering. Clumio had raised over 260 million across multiple funding rounds with investors that included Sutter Hill Ventures, Index Ventures, and Altimeter Capital. Clumio, for those who've never heard of the company, helps companies back up and recover their data in the cloud, particularly on Amazon Web Services. And their customers include large-scale enterprise environments. Prior to Clumio, you were the CEO and co-founder of Pernix Data, where you raised over 60 million from well-known VCs like Lightspeed Ventures, KPCB, and Menlo Ventures, all the big boys. You sold the company to Nutanix in 2016, and then stayed on to help build the company's core platform and scale the business through its 2016 IPO, which opened at $2.2 billion in that company. I did a sneak peek this morning. As of a couple hours ago, it was valued on the public markets at 10.4 billion. So although you didn't lead all of that, it's fun to participate in a huge success and to see that success not only open in the markets well, but continue to increase the valuation significantly over time. Always success stories are fun to talk about. Over several decades, you had held senior leadership roles prior at VMware and Oracle. Poojan has a bachelor's in computer science from IIT Bombay and a master's in computer science from Stanford University. Another one of those smart Stanford guys. So Poojan, it's really a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, let's step back, not to the beginning, but kind of this inflection point that I think people who work in companies are always looking at the grass on the other side, right? And seeing all these stories endlessly of people that start up companies and they go on to build these things, make huge impacts, generate lots of value for themselves, their teammates, their shareholders, et cetera. You sit in that spot a little bit in the sense that you did spend many, many years in senior leadership roles at Oracle and VMware as an example. You were one of those guys that decided to make that jump. So what motivated you to take this leap and leave that the security and comfort of large companies where you had the big title, you're obviously paid well, you had tons of resources and support. After all that, rather than be a company guy and ride it off into the sunset over the decades, you decided to drop it all and become an entrepreneur. What possibly would motivate you to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So I think it goes back to fundamentally, what I've really been in my life. So one thing that's kind of hidden behind, the Oracle and VMware stories is also the fact that in both those companies, I was responsible for starting something, brand new. So that has been a consistent theme in my career. Oracle, VMware, Pernix Data, and then Clumio. I think one thing common across all four has been, starting something new. So let's start with Oracle, right? So in Oracle, after the first few years, I was right place at the right time, and we had an idea to go and start something in the data warehousing world. This was a precursor to what you see with Snowflake and Databricks today in the on-prem data center world. And that became very successful. It was called Exadata. right? And the product is still there, and it went from zero to a billion of revenue at Oracle within 5 years of its selling. So super successful initiative that I helped start. But that gave me a window into the art of the possible and the business of technology, where you build something, a great product for a problem that many customers have, and how the velocity or something like that be, and how fast it can scale. So that was something that I created, but obviously it was within the umbrella of Oracle. So very different, obviously not out in the open world and wild west, where you go and start try creating a startup, right? So that was Oracle. And then between Oracle and VMware, I tried to do something, didn't quite pan out, so I went to VMware. And VMware also, I was hired to basically go after a new initiative, because back then VMware was a hypervisor play on the ESX virtualization side, and they were trying to grow up the stack. And so we were essentially going and doing a new initiative again in the data side. Now that, again, sometimes you can put all the inputs, but the output might not be exactly what you want. So that wasn't as successful, or even as close, even remotely close to what the initiative at Oracle was. But we created a great product, and ultimately that whole thing got packaged as a business unit in one of the companies that VMware spun off, called Pivotal. So then, that was about a couple years, and I saw the writing on the wall that it's not going to take off like my previous thing. So, but between those two, even though within large company initiatives, I got enough of the confidence, and I always had the drive and the motivation and the ambition to go something and do something of my own. I said, okay, now it's time to go and try to replicate what I did at an Oracle and VMware, but do it by myself. And that was the beginning of Coordinates Data.
Yeah, I think that we used to call it entrepreneurialism,
Yes.
and it was close to being an entrepreneur, but the idea was a little bit safer because you have resources. And I think today, so many people talk about that you see on YouTube this advice of, hey, don't wait, don't wait. If you're 24, just get out there, just start doing it, do the startup. But so many people, I think there's a better way in many cases, particularly for the individual as well. Why not get all the experience at a big company? Why not start something internal or run a business unit and learn what it's like to gather resources, pitch for resources, build a network of connections, and then foster that idea so that when you're ready to take the jump, you're a little bit more seasoned. And maybe you don't even have to take as much capital until you get further up the chain and have less dilution and so forth. So I think it's really interesting. I'm sure also that when you do take that leap, and then you go into the pure naked entrepreneurial world, you probably thought there were some things that I didn't expect that was different from becoming an entrepreneur versus going out and doing it on my own.
Yeah,
Was there
yeah.
one or two things where you said, "Oh my gosh, I didn't expect this"?
Yeah, no, I think a ton of things. I think I would start with, there's one thing to build a product and have a business card of Oracle or VMware, where people actually will be very happy to take your meeting, right? And
Mhm.
listen to what you have to say. Guess what? You try to do that as an unknown startup, you're going to basically, there's going to be a lot of dials before you get somebody who wants to listen to you, right?
For
And so
sure.
that was obviously one difference. Obviously, and the other difference was just capital, right? So you take it for granted in large companies, not just your own paycheck and resources, but you just take it for granted that, okay, I can do these things, and if it doesn't fail, most likely I still have my job, right? It's not like you tried, and most likely you'll have your job if you did everything right. Startups are brutal, right? Firstly, you might not be able to raise capital. I have a lot of folks have helped in the past, very very capable folks, but raising capital was hard and not straightforward. So you can't take that for granted, because we all hear all these great stories of TechCrunch and all writing about big rounds and big valuations and stuff like that, but for each one of them there's thousand of them that do not get funded, that nobody writes about, of course.
Yeah.
And
No,
so, yeah, go ahead.
that's so true. Yeah, that's so
Yeah,
true.
yeah,
But you were successful. It's not like you went out and raised, 5 million bucks. I mean, you raised almost 60 million. That is a significant amount of money raised. But then in the next venture after that, Clumio, you raised almost a quarter, a little bit over $250 million with a massive C round financing that was over 100 million. What was it that you learned through the trials, tribulations, and success of capital raising that first 60 million that positioned you to be able to raise 260 million with Clumio?
yeah, no, absolutely. Firstly, obviously doing it first time and second time, it's a little different. Candidly, I think doing it first time, at least as founder CEO, you really don't know what you're doing. Right? You're basically learning on the job a lot of stuff. But second time, at least a bunch of stuff is familiar. At least, right? You feel like you're in a familiar territory. You've seen like, oh, you even though the context is different, the company is different, everything is different, but you still feel like, okay, I've seen the feeling of this chapter, so I can at least navigate through this chapter. So I think that is one big difference. And obviously, I think the other big thing was, with Clumio, we are trying to go after a much bigger play. We're trying to go after a much bigger, business. We're trying to go after, competing with hyperscalers. And also, we had an environment which was candidly much easier to raise capital. The zero interest rate, phenomena environment was a little bit, easier, definitely from a capital raise perspective. All of those things came together, I would say, both my own, where I was, where what the problem we were going after, and also candidly the capital environments.
How important was the fact that you had had a successful exit prior? Like, does that factor in? Is that like when you're trying to raise all this money for your next venture, leveraging off of that, is that like get you 70% of the way there? Or people like, do they not care? Are they like, hey, some of our successful entrepreneurs had a successful run before. Some of them had some failures. We dig into that and figured, hey, the best guys, have multiple failures before they go into the successes. Did it matter much, or was that a big motivating thing for raising money for the next one?
I'll say I think it's three stages to the question. I think the number one thing that matters is your own background, right? What you have done in the past and how relevant that background is to what you're trying to solve. People do look at your deep expertise and what you have gained, and especially if you're going and trying to raise money just based on idea. I'm not trying to say, oh, you built something already and you already have traction and then you're going. That's different. But if you're just raising money on an idea, your experience does matter, what you've done in the past. So that is number one, I would say. Number two is, and by the way, number one includes not just you, the team, right? The team, the
Mhm.
expertise of the team to the idea. And then number two is just at least for the tier one VCs out there, it's just, what's the potential of this? Like what's the home run scenario, right? And everybody knows that not every company is going to get that home run scenario. But if if everything aligns, what could be the home run scenario? How big is this market? And if you've created something that is truly differentiated, and it's a big market, then you can go have a massive exit. So I think these two things matter. And then if these two things are awesome, then obviously the third thing, which is, okay, have you been there, done that before, definitely does play a role, definitely does play a role.
When you went and pitched, did you, because we go through this in recruiting all the time. Sometimes people want to raise money and they want what we would call a soft commitment from somebody. So when they're going to raise that first significant institutional tranche, they're going to say, well, what are you going to do with the money? Who's the team? And part of the pitch is, well, I've got this person and that person who are lined up, ready to leave where they are today as soon as we get the funding. Did that factor come up for you guys? And was that part of your strategy, or did you just automatically have a team that went with you?
No, I think in both cases, and that's what I tell people. I think, if somebody is going to give you that kind of a commitment, they need the commitment from you first. So the team has to be there. Team has to basically believe in it and should have an ideal world, and that's how it should be. And that was the case for us for sure. They should have jumped both feet in already. And whether the funding came or not, you have to believe in the mission and you have to be basically going after the mission. And then you can expect somebody to go and make a bet. So that's what I tell folks. I think it should never be this whole situation about, oh, give me the money and then I'll get XYZ and ABC. No, that XYZ and ABC person should have been there already. And it tells me a lot if they're not there. Is like, okay, are they risk averse? Which again, there's going to be so many ups and downs later on. What's going to happen later on? This is just the beginning, right?
Yeah.
So I don't like that situation where you're relying on people coming later. Those people should be there in the room with you at that time.
That first group is somewhat evangelical in a way, right? So it's not just risk aversion, but they have to really believe and where you're going. And if the belief is there and they're willing to leave everything now, they're probably going to be there, through that first part of the journey that can be difficult.
Absolutely. It's a missionary versus mercenary we talk about, right? I think it has to be the
Totally.
missionary totally. And again, as I said, that is just the beginning. There's going to be so much going on after that, especially in startup land, which nobody talks about. Because again, we all hear about all the great stories on media, but the reality is startups are brutal, and so that team being there when you are nothing is very important.
Well, let's talk about Clumio for a minute, because one of the fun things I get to do with these podcasts, I get to learn about all different businesses, all different industries, all different spaces. I would have guessed without knowing it that Amazon Web Services would have the best backup they could ever have internally, would put so much money into that. Um, so where does Clumio fit in? I know AWS is one of their biggest clients, and where was the opportunity that you saw? And why does AWS use your services versus maybe investing in more backup infrastructure themselves?
No, absolutely. I think at the end of the day, you're right, right? The major cloud providers, and which, by the way, as of yesterday, Clumio went multi-cloud. So we do support the Google Cloud also. But you're right.
Wow.
And, historically, we supported
Well, we will ask
AWS
Amazon and Google why
and Google.
both of them need a backup.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's more about they have their own backup. All these hyperscalers have their own backup solution. But then at the end of the day, customers like a third party vendor coming in and
Mhm.
essentially going and providing this, both because you can essentially, if you do it right, you're focused on that problem. Like it's saying, why Snowflake data warehousing much better than any of the cloud providers, right? So that's why Snowflake became successful. So by going deep into that problem, you do a much better job, much better scale. Like the scale we handle today, with the simplicity we handle today, and with the cost we handle today, is something that even the hyperscalers cannot handle. That's number one. And number two, I think from a customer perspective, as more and more customers are becoming multi-cloud, they don't want to have a different thing for a different cloud and then learn a different solution for a different cloud. You rather have a Clumio that essentially does it for all of your applications at any scale across any cloud. So that was always the value proposition, even though I think we just stayed on AWS for a while, as you rightly pointed out, because, as a startup, AWS was a massive revenue pool anyways. So it's like there was no big push to go and become multi-cloud early on, because,
Yeah.
you could, a dollar was a dollar, which is irrespective of which cloud it came from. So we focused on one, but then now we have broadened into two.
Well, I have to think the Commvault's pretty excited because so much of the business is built on AWS, and now to bring in Google Cloud, that's gotta be a big significant marker for the future of the company.
No, no, absolutely. I think it's been a great story. And again, working at Commvault along with the Clumio solution and our reach overnight went from, we were selling only in the US to around the globe, right? With, orders of magnitude more sellers. So I think it's been a great ride, and I'm super excited about where things are going.
So was that the big driver for why Commvault why did they purchase you? Obviously, they figured, just as you just gave us, that, "Hey, we've got distribution essentially, reach, and we could take this product and expand it outward." Was it just a strategic decision, or where was the value that they saw to acquire you guys?
Oh, totally. I think if you look at Commvault, in fact, they just finished their 30 years. They're celebrating the 30-year anniversary as of this week. So the company was basically formed in the data center world, has a massive business in the backup space, in the data center, and of course SaaS and then cloud. And they saw this big opportunity. And for any of the backup vendors now, data protection vendors, cloud is a massive opportunity. So Commvault saw this, and their CEO saw it, and we have known each other for a little bit of time, and we're talking to each other. So we saw this, that we could do 1 + 1 = 3 together. So that's really was the genesis of the two companies coming together.
So I know we talked about this pre-pod a little bit. A lot of times when a company is acquired, the founder will stay on board for a period of time. Sometimes it's a legitimate lockup. Sometimes it's just a part of the negotiation to keep resources, people together. But I know you expressed that you're really excited about the business, and Commvault's kind of has a lot of different opportunities available. What were the things that helped you decide whether I want to stay here after the acquisition to really grow it out? Which I think I know because obviously with the Google Cloud announcement, sometimes it's fun to stay at a place where you're limited in what you can grow on your own and you want to make it bigger faster through this process. What really drove you to stay with Commvault and get so excited about their future?
Yeah, so for me, I think, fundamentally, I like to be challenged, every day, and I like to be busy, and that is the basis, right? I cannot being you probably know this, right? Having done startups multiple times, there's so much of adrenaline in the system that you need to keep that going, right? So in my first exit with Nutanix, at the end of the day, I think the platform got integrated into the Nutanix platform. And so, well, there was a role for me. I saw this cloud as a big opportunity. So I was like, yeah, I can be here, and I love the company. I love the people. I loved everything about that place. But I was like, no, I want to run towards this cloud opportunity, which basically was essentially Clumio. Commvault is a little different for me. I'm still very focused on the mission. I started Clumio in 2017, and that mission is still, a fraction of it is done. and I'm on the same mission right now, right? So I think that is a big reason why I'm super excited about where things are. And again, they've created an environment where, again, I'm charged up, I have a big mission, the adrenaline is high, and so that's what keeps me motivated and excited. And so, I don't look at change for the sake of changing. I have to look for a change because I'm going after a mission. The mission was Clumio when I was leaving Nutanix. The mission is Clumio. That's why I'm staying here.
Fantastic. I'm sure your team was happy to hear that too, because
Yeah, I mean, a
that
good part of my
oftentimes
team. Yeah,
happens.
absolutely. A good part of my team is actually still here, and it's for the same reason. Because me, my co-founder, both of us are here, and a bunch of folks who started with us actually, from day one, are still here with us. Because again, as I said, the mission is the same.
So, like, what would be your home run goal for 2026? Looking through
Home
the end
run
of the year. Yeah.
Home run over. I mean, there's a lot of internal goals that we have that I cannot share, but essentially, it's a lot of it is around product and capabilities that we want to go and build on the platform. There's so much to go and build, especially now with AI and stuff like that. And then also, obviously, from a top line revenue perspective, go grow the business. So in those two dimensions is where both the goals lie.
Well, I'd love to ask this because everybody today at any company is being impacted somehow by AI, and certainly, companies out here in the valley or on the forefront of all of that. What is it that you see about AI, since you are a technology leader? What do you see that excites you the most, and what makes you the most nervous?
Yeah, so our industry is a little, I think, insulated just because we're not a wrapper and just a simple application or a workflow on top of a database and things like that. So I think it's a little different. But I think for us, I think at the end of the day, taking advantage of AI and doing things that we were not able to do before, right? That is the most exciting thing, and just integrating all of that capabilities in the product itself, so that the end user at the end of the day sees the benefit, and also use some of the capabilities like cloud out there from a coding perspective, and really go accelerate things fast. So there's a lot of
Yeah.
things, both integrating stuff in the product and also leveraging it to go faster, is what I get super excited about. Obviously, I think from things that I would say, okay, we've got to watch out for, which might not be true for our industry, but definitely I think there is a lot of verticals where there is potential for a lot of disruption, as the Anthropic founder talks about. Like there's a class of jobs which AI can go and really go and disrupt, and so for sure that is scary if I look at the broader economy. Definitely.
Yeah, I was just checking out briefly the first California governor debate that was on last night. And that question did come up, as it's always something that you read in mainstream media today about potential job loss. And I think people are wondering what they should do, where they should invest their time in their careers today. We're retained search firms, so we have a lot of those types of discussions. And there are people that are super excited and they're jumping into it to become their own knowledge resource. And there's other people that are terrified and hiding out from it. And I know some companies now, one of the most important things they're looking for is they want to see what you've already done in AI, not as an expert, but in terms of how does your mind work? Are you excited about it and thinking about what tasks can I optimize by just exploring internally, even if it's something small? They just want to see where the mentality is at. Do you believe that that's going to be a big part of the future, that people need to be able to embrace change and bring it into every aspect of what they're doing? Or do you think it's going to be more like a functional role the way technology had been in the past?
No, absolutely. I think you bring up a very interesting thing. In fact, this is what we actually talk about internally also, with our team. And most recently, we're talking about is like use all of these things and think of these things as essential part of your tools, right? No different than how you embraced IDEs while writing code. You're going to embrace some of these things. If you do not, then you're going to be left behind, right?
Yeah.
And so we are basically, almost not forcing is the wrong word, but getting people, encouraging people to make sure that they see this as part of their job and embrace these things. Otherwise, they themselves, especially the ones who are, still maybe reasonably early in their career and they have 20, 30 years of career remaining, you're going to become obsolete if you don't embrace this change, right? So that's the ideology that we have been getting people to think about very actively.
Do you offer programs for people to learn AI, or is it just something that you have to jump into at your company and just be part of a team that's doing stuff?
No, overall, I think overall Commvault, and that's the benefit of having a large company. If I was a startup, I
Right.
would be like very scrappy and go figure it out yourself and stuff like that. But I think, Commvault being a much bigger company with a lot of resources, they have a very methodical approach to some of these things. And there's a top down, a nice push in terms of giving people access to things that they can essentially go and learn stuff. Absolutely.
So, so again, you've been in both worlds. You've been in the large corporations. You've actually been more of that. You've worked in large corporations. You've done the entrepreneurial thing before successfully, one larger than the other. You've done the entrepreneurial things, then you're acquired, you're now doing that again. Is there something that you've enjoyed more? I mean, have you enjoyed the excitement, the juice of doing a startup like a lot of people, like you say, I've got to go out and do that again because that's really the lightning in the bottle of excitement for me? Or are you getting to a stage now in your life where you're like, hey, I've been successful at all these things. Now I seek the comfort of maybe a larger company where I've got the resources and I can just ride this out and really make it into something enormous. I don't want to say are startup entrepreneurials made or are they born, but this is the direction because I don't know if you started out thinking I have to be an entrepreneur one day. Maybe you led the discussion a little bit, but you did the path of I want to be, but I'm going to do it internally where maybe I have more resources and it's easier before just jumping. But where do you fall on that spectrum today as it stands for you?
Yeah, no, I think, I definitely tell myself like, oh, there's definitely one more in me. It's not like I'm
Okay.
done. That's for sure. But having said that, I think, as I said, right, I think the key thing, at least, I tell people even when they come and, say I want to start a company and stuff like that, I think you really have to ask yourself the why behind it, right? It's like,
Hmm.
you just don't want to go and do something because, you won't make a bunch of money and stuff like that. I think you really have to, believe in what you're doing, right? And believe in the mission. But more importantly, I think at the end of the day, you want to be excited every single day on what you're doing, so which is where it doesn't really matter whether you're doing it as a startup or whether you're doing it in the large company. Obviously, I think in the large company, at times you have to have this patience element to it, right? Because obviously the company is going to be focused on 10 different things. You're probably one of them, or five different things, or you're one of them. So yeah, it's still big. You still have the resources, but hey, you're going to share some, airtime with, four different things, right? Versus in your startup, you can go and, take all the airtime you want. So there is an element of the mindset that has to be a little different if you're trying to do it in a large company which has existing. And there's a reason you have the resources because they probably have existing big enough business. You are the fledgling, the early business, but
Yeah.
essentially they have an existing business. So I think all of those things require a certain thought process that you have to be comfortable with, and not everybody might be happy or comfortable with that kind of a setting. But if you can carve that out, you can actually get the best of both worlds. You can go like, I feel like I have that right now, which is I can go and execute on my mission, while I have all the goodnesses that the large company can give me. But that requires some figuring out, and obviously it requires support, top down. There's a lot of things that you have to go get it right. Not every time you can get it right, but of course if you're in a startup, you only have, I mean, there also, if you raise venture capital, you still, at the end of the day, you have VCs who've given you a bunch of capital and you're answerable to them. But at least you can, for the most part, you can go do whatever you want, and if you're doing the right things, it doesn't matter. So it's a little different for sure.
I think in a way you're hedging your bets too. And I was just reflecting on this when you brought it up, which is today, these large companies, these large tech companies, like a VMware, for example, or an Oracle, they can lay off tens of thousands of people immediately. And there's been announcements just in the past week where this has been the case. Entire teams where people are like, hey, I used to make $250,000 and now I'm on the street. I just got a notice on my email, right? I love this idea. It takes a little more chutzpah and risk of trying to start a business within one of those large companies. Because I know those large companies are always looking for people of that mindset. It's difficult because people of that mindset traditionally are maybe out there doing it. They want to get acquired by the company and make a bunch of money and then leave and do it again. But I think you hedge your bet if you do that. So if you do start a business and it's successful, well, that's great for the company. You learned a lot. If they do these large layoffs, which you see often, then you have the credibility and the confidence to maybe do it on your own. I have seen so many execs, particularly older executives, and I say older meaning, let's say north of 40, right? They've had leadership roles for decades. We see this in recruiting all the time. They lose their job and now they're looking around for a little bit. They're not, it's taking a little longer and they're thinking, should I go and start something? They have the network, but they've never actually done it before, right? They had all the resources. They were running the business which they were promoted into. So I like the approach that you took. I don't know if it was part of the master plan, but it evolved that way. And I think that's an interesting approach. So if people are thinking about cutting their teeth at a big company, maybe that's an opportunity to find out if they've got any area where they're looking to grow and start an entrepreneurial type business. Volunteer, take the risk there. It's inherently less risky. And then you cut your chops. And if something happens, you can stay or you can go. And you've just expanded opportunities for yourself.
Yeah, but I think fundamentally in any situation, you do have to have the mindset though, because I think whether you're
Yeah.
starting, whenever you're starting something from scratch where there's nothing there, you have to be able to roll up your sleeves and, there is nobody to delegate, right? You have to go and be able to go figure it out yourself. So that mindset is the constant. I think once you have that mindset, then I can say based on your risk appetite, you can go and try to do it on your own or do it here, right? Obviously if you do it in a large company, you take less risk inherently, but there's less upside also. It's obvious that
Yeah.
that's the case. But there you take more risk, but there's more upside. But then mindset is something that's invariant.
I forget the actual stat. I should have looked it up, but I remember it was a huge number, something like 40% of all the huge tech companies out here in California were started by people who are not Americans. They came over here to see a better life. They came over here to study at the universities. I don't think that correlation is an accident. Most of these people, when they came over here as students, they didn't come over as daughters and sons of billionaire families. I've had some friends too. They came over with $1,000 in their pocket and they just started. So I think that process itself of taking a risk and thinking optimistically about the future, I'm going to find a way to build something and make it valuable. That's part of the entrepreneurial mindset that's probably honed in that experience that you had younger in life, even though we haven't really gotten into your personal origin story.
No, absolutely. It's similar, right? And when I came with $2,000 in my pocket. That's the entire thing I had. And of course, I had a scholarship at Stanford and all that. It was still a red carpet in the grand scheme of things. But still, I think you just had to go and rebuild your life in a completely new place, and you started with nothing. So that mindset was there. It was like, okay, there's nothing to lose. It's not like when I left Oracle or VMware, they didn't try to retain me, right? And throw enough at me. But I was like, not really. That doesn't change anything for me right now. It's not like, suddenly you give me a bunch of extra money and I'll still live in that $1,500 apartment or whatever, right? Or now maybe the lifestyle is upgraded, but that's, still the case. So that's not the one that's giving you happiness. It's something else. So you're essentially going towards what's giving you happiness.
Yeah, that's awesome advice. What advice would you give to some of the younger generation who are starting companies right now? Maybe they're getting off track a little bit. They're having a little of that typical anxiety and security. Is there one piece of advice that you could give them given the experiences that you've had over the past 20, 30 years?
No, I think more than anything else, and obviously I'm a product guy, so I think of my advice also in that dimension, which is if you are thinking about doing a company in today's day and age, I think it's very important to make sure that what you're building doesn't get commoditized tomorrow, right? So
Hmm.
you have to little bit think a little bit ahead and make sure that you're building enough moat, around whatever you're doing, especially on the product side, that you don't get commoditized, because more often, like more true than maybe even 10 years ago or 15 or 12 years ago when I started my entrepreneurial journey, you used to worry about Amazon's, AWS's of the world and stuff like that. Oh yeah, they can get into this, they can got the big companies, the Oracles and Cisco's of the world and stuff like that. But in the AI day and age, you're in a very different this thing. You're going and building on top of the model providers, and so you have to just absolutely make sure that you're building enough moat on top of it, and whatever you're doing is something that has long term potential, right? So that thinking has to be ingrained, because while it might be very easy to go and raise some small amounts of capital, or capital in general, because a lot of capital is available, and things like that, that's not anything to do with success. Whether you have raised capital is just a means to an end, and that is no bearing to success. So I think that deep thinking and thinking one step ahead, and I've been a chess player all my life, going and thinking four moves ahead is very important in terms of what you're doing.
Yeah, the thing I'd add to that is that 4 moves ahead, but at an accelerated pace. I think that's part of the thing today is the speed of change, not just having the strategy in place, the speed at which it's changing. And you were seeing that all the time now for software, right? This idea of software going to continue to grow, or is AI somehow going to be a new technology that's going to absorb all of that to some degree? And so, not just having that great strategy and building that big moat, but at what speed is that moat going to lose its strength? we don't really know. And I think that's where some of this insecurity comes today with some of these businesses.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, yeah, it's I would say, it's harder than ever before. But at the same time, I'll also say that, the opportunity is way bigger than ever before. So I'm an entrepreneur by heart. So I definitely encourage people to go and do that. Anytime anybody comes to me, is like, I'm all in. I go, and even if I have no financial interest in something, I go and help people to the best I can, because I think ultimately, that's what we are. We are here for all that, because at the end of the day, you go and do it. Maybe you don't succeed first time. If you get lucky, obviously you do a home run first time. But every time you do something and you learn, that learning compounds, and that learning is yours to keep. We might not have made a big paycheck out of it, but the learning is yours to keep, and that compounds. And that is why I would say people should definitely go and try if they're passionate about something.
Well, that's awesome. And that would lead me into the question I always ask my guests at the end of the podcast. And this has been a lot of fun. It is the Venture to Victory podcast. So the question I'd ask you is, what does it mean to you, Poojan, whether it's in business, whether it's in social life, whatever, to truly be victorious?
What does it mean for me to truly be victorious? I think for me, to truly be victorious is to be a person that people can associate with something. Like, it's like, oh, he built something interesting, or he built a great company, a great culture, or something great. So I think it's not fame in a way, but you can say it is, right, kind of that. But really, in something that I feel proud about doing on a daily basis, if people know me for the same thing, that's victorious.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not really the thing, it's the process you go through to move to the thing and the experiences you have along the way. Look, when it's all over, the only thing that really lasts is the memory of the
Absolutely.
experience you had with human beings. So I think
Yes.
that's a wonderful answer. Well, hey, it's been a lot of fun and I appreciate you and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Tim. It was a fantastic conversation, and I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Cheers. The Venture to Victory podcast is provided by MatchStar Venture Search. If you're interested in any of our open executive roles or need help sourcing world class talent for your company, check out our website at matchstar.com.